Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and in this tutorial we are going to have a look at the approach and landing in the Flight Sim Studios Boeing 727. Now we are picking this one up just where we left off last time, descending to the platform altitude and on the intercept heading for the ILS approach for runway 25 right in Brussels. Now we've left Bruno on the 214 track and we are going to fly onto the ILS over here, intercept the platform altitude, slow down, intercept the glide slope, cross-check our final altitude over the auto marker, which we will see blinking over here, and then we are going to land the aircraft. We are going to do a flap 30 landing over here, but before we go into all of that, let's quickly talk a little bit about the approach schedule. So we're going to start the approach with our flaps in clean configuration and at 200 knots. Once again, a little reminder into the documentation. Our flap position and maneuvering schedule is something that we simply have to learn by heart here. It's 200 knots for flap 0, 190 flaps 2, 160 flaps 5, 150 flaps 15, 140, 25, and then the threshold speed, which we calculated as 122 on this one for our landing flap setting. So the flap extension schedule is going to be at 200 knots, flaps 2, reduce 190 knots, flaps 5, reduce 160 knots, and at that speed we are going to intercept the glide slope. Now, approximately 2,000 feet AGL, so at roughly 6 nautical miles inbound, we're going to extend the landing gear, go flaps 15, and then configure the aircraft for landing. However, I do recommend that you only follow this schedule if you use the autopilot for the approach. Otherwise, a lot of things are going to happen at the same time, and if you are manually flying the aircraft while you're also configuring for landing, reducing speed, setting speed bugs, etc., things are bound to go wrong. So if you do a manual ILS approach, I recommend that you get the aircraft into landing configuration before you actually intercept the approach. Alright, so all of that out of the way, a quick word on our autopilot and its functions. So looking at the autopilot down here, you can see the nav selector rotated one to the left goes into nav and localizer mode. And in order to capture the glide slope, we gotta go to auto glide slope over here on the right hand side. So we can either first capture by going to localizer mode and then going to glide slope mode as the glide slope comes alive, or we go directly to the glide slope mode. But doing the latter comes with a problem that the Flight Sim Studios Boeing seems to have some issues with arming the modes before the actual localizer and glide slope signals start coming in on our HSI and ADI. So sometimes you can't arm them before the things actually come active, or rather before the localizer and the glide slope start to run in. So that's a little bit tricky at times. I'm not convinced that that is how the real 727 worked, but it seems to be how the airplane works at the time of this recording. Okay then, let's go ahead and take it out of active pause over here. We are going to continue our descent, and we are on the intercept heading. Now, speed is roughly 200 knots. We can probably reduce our thrust a little bit further there so that it starts slowing down. Our altitude select is armed at 2,000 feet and we're capturing the altitude right now. And now we got to keep a good eye on our HSI. So if we simply go ahead and select the auto glide slope position now, seems to work this time that they do arm, but seems a little bit unreliable. I've seen the airplane go through the localizer, through the glide slope, so sometimes I haven't quite figured out exactly why it does the things the way it does them. Okay, back to our approach though. We are approaching with 200 knots, as I've mentioned, and since we are already level at the platform altitude, we can maintain those 200 knots until just outside 10 DME. Okay, Warlock has captured. So let's go ahead and set the runway heading over here. I'm going to maintain those 200 over here, roughly until the glide slope comes active. Probably at, let's say, 11 miles we will start to slow down, and then we are going to intercept the glide slope at 160 knots. Okay then, here we go. So we are established on the localizer. Our airport is at our 12 o'clock position. There's our runway over there, and the cargo apron is located to the right of it. So you've got to remember that when we are going to vacate our runway, that we vacate to the right side there. Okay, so next up we're waiting for the glide slope to come in. As a little reminder, we are in 2000 AGL, so we expect the glide slope at 6 DME. Reaching 11 DME now, let's go flaps 2. Speed checked. And we gotta wait until the leading edge flaps have extended before we go past the 2 positions. So this is gonna take a while, as we've seen on the ground. Nonetheless, speed buck down towards 190, as that is the next speed we want to fly. And we can pull off a little bit of that thrust so that we start decelerating. So the leading edge flaps are extended, let's go flaps 5. Speed checked. And then we can set our speed buck down towards 160 knots. Speed is coming down, waiting for the glide slope to come in. We expect to intercept it in 3 nautical miles. So it looks like we will be in for a nice and stable approach over here. So speed is coming down, waiting to intercept 160 knots. And here we are. So adding a bit of thrust, and just to show you again, I simply set my thrust levers here and just wait and see what happens. You can see with that the speed can be controlled pretty precisely. Okay, the glide slope does start to come in over here. So that's 1 dot to go. Let's set the missed approach altitude, 3000. Glide slope capture. Okay, gear down, flaps 15. And now we're slowing down towards our final approach speed, plus 5 knots. We're looking at roughly 130 for the final approach. Extend the flaps on schedule. So flaps 20, flaps 25, and flaps 30. We do not arm the speed brake in here. On some 727s you do, not on this one. If you arm it on this one, you're just going to get the configuration warning. As you can see over here. Okay, passing the outer marker, we should be 1410 over the marker, as you can see on the chart, and we are indeed, so the glide slope is working correctly. And with that, we are all prepared for our landing. Again, if slush or heavy precipitation would be expected, then we would go ahead and turn on continuous ignition. Otherwise, you do not need to turn the continuous ignition on. Just again a quick check that our auto brake is indeed in the position where we require it to be. And with all of that, we are prepared for our landing. So let's go ahead and quickly pause the simulator right over here before we disconnect the autopilot and fly our landing. So, as we're about to disconnect the autopilot, a couple words of how to manually track the glide slope. Of course, you could use the flight director, but you don't have to. Now, I personally find it actually easier without flight director than with the flight director. So the key to a successful approach is to maintain first of all a constant thrust setting, because changing the thrust always needs a little bit of retrimming, and that just has a tendency to destabilize the approach. So try to find the thrust setting that works best. Now, as a general rule of thumb, a fuel flow of 3,500 pounds per hour is going to give you roughly the final approach speed. So about 3,500 pounds per hour on each engine is normally going to work pretty well. Now, if deviations from the glide slope and from the localizer occur, correct carefully and slowly, only make small corrections, and most importantly, correct using your attitude. Do not correct using your vertical speed indication or whatever. The vertical speed indication, even though the gauge is called an instant vertical speed indicator, is not instant and not accurate. So the way to do this, you can see now we've got a pitch of about minus 2.5 degrees over here. As we slow down to the approach speed, that is going to come up a little bit. So adjust the pitch as needed to maintain the glide slope, but do not chase the needle. If you're a little bit high, just pitch down by a degree. Watch what happens, and when you're back on, pitch back to your original pitch. Likewise, if you deviate from the localizer, just a tiny bit of bank is going to work pretty well. Aim to cross the threshold at 50 feet or the published threshold crossing height, normally 50 feet. Flare at 20, idle, and fly the airplane all the way onto the ground. That's the important thing, fly it onto the ground. Once we touch down, manually deploy the speed brakes, apply maximum reverse thrust or idle reverse as needed, and confirm the auto brake operating or apply manual braking to brake the airplane to vacate at the intended exit. Alright, so that's about it. Let's go ahead and continue over here. I'm going to disconnect the autopilot now, and we are going to fly this approach. So, as mentioned, maintain the pitch, try to adjust the thrust really only where needed. We've got a couple knots of speed that we have to lose over here, which I am going to deplete very slowly right now. And apart from that, simply adjust the pitch as needed. Slightly deviating from the localizer, so small bit of bank here should work pretty well. In general, the key to everything is to do very small corrections only. Also make sure the airplane is and stays in trim, and then you can really fly it down easily and precisely. Okay, minimum, continue. Now mentally prepare for the flare. At 20 we pitch up. 20. Idle. And fly it onto the ground. Touchdown. Speed brakes up. Deploy the spoilers. Get back to or track the center line. Okay, manual brakes. 70 knots, reversers going out. And now we are simply going to roll towards the next appropriate exit for the cargo apron to the right. Well, and that's it. That's about as easy as it is to land a Boeing 727. I do hope that you have enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. Leave your feedback in the comments below. I'm very much looking forward to that. And as always, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. And before I'm closing this tutorial, just a quick word over here. It is a common misconception for flight simmers that when vacating a runway they stop in front of the hold short line. Don't do that. Stop behind the hold short line. So we're going to vacate the runway over here towards the cargo apron, and we'll keep the airplane rolling. We'll keep it rolling, 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 rolling. Here's the hold short line. Do not stop in front, much rather get the entire airplane behind that line. Alright, so here we are. This should be behind the line. When you get to learn the aircraft, I recommend that you just go to the outside view every now and then to confirm that you have actually stopped completely clear of the line, as we have in this case. Alright, this concludes our landing tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something. Like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much, and see you all again on the next one.